She had 48 hours left to live. The doctors had stopped saying if and started saying when. Her mother had already called the funeral home. Her best friend had quietly started writing the eulogy. And Maya Chin, 29 years old, a second-grade teacher who still kept a jar of fireflies on her windowsill every summer, didn't know any of it. She thought she was getting better. She wasn't. Across the city, in a glass tower that scraped the belly of the clouds, a man sat alone in a room filled with screens and silence. His name was Ethan Rowe, 37, $4.2 billion in net worth. He had never once spent money without knowing exactly what it would return. Until that night. That night, he wired $300 million into an account with no name attached, just a patient number. Room 412. St. Mercy Hospital. Floor 4. Window seat. The woman with the dark hair and the unfinished book on her bedside table. And then he sat back and watched the numbers disappear from his screen and felt something he hadn't felt in 11 years. Relief. She survived. She healed. She walked out of that hospital 3 months later thinking she'd simply been lucky, that the experimental treatment was covered by a grant, that the universe had decided she deserved more time. She never knew his name. He never told her. But secrets like that don't stay buried. And some debts, even the ones you never asked for, have a way of coming back around. But let me take you back to where this all began. Maya Chun loved mornings the way most people love the feeling just before sleep, that soft, unguarded space where everything still feels possible. She would wake at 6:15 without an alarm, shuffle to her kitchen in socks with little foxes on them, and brew coffee so strong her upstairs neighbor once knocked to ask if something was burning. She taught second grade at Lincoln Elementary on the east side of the city. 22 7-year-olds who called her Miss Maya and left flowers made of pipe cleaners on her desk every Friday. She was exactly where she wanted to be. Not rich, not ambitious in the way the city rewarded, but full. In February, she got a cold that wouldn't leave. By March, the cold had a name. Aplastic anemia. Severe. Her bone marrow had simply stopped. Like a factory that ran out of workers and couldn't recruit fast enough. Her blood counts were dropping. Her fatigue was the kind that sat on your chest like a stone. And her doctor, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Lim, who wore novelty ties and had the gentlest voice Maya had ever heard, told her that without an aggressive course of treatment, she was looking at 6 months. Maybe less. Maya heard the words. She understood them. And then she asked the only question that mattered to her. Will I be able to finish the school year? Dr. Lim looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, let's focus on keeping you here first, Maya. Ethan Rowe did not believe in luck. He believed in data, in leverage, in the mathematics of human behavior. At 37, he had turned a small software startup into Rowe Systems, a technology company so pervasive that its fingerprints were on nearly every financial transaction processed in the Western Hemisphere. Forbes had profiled him twice. He declined the cover photo both times. He didn't want his face out there. Faces made you relatable. Relatable made you vulnerable. He lived on the 47th floor of a building he owned. His apartment had 17 rooms. He used 4 of them. He had not been in a relationship since Claire. Since what happened with Claire. Since the lawsuit that followed, and the settlement that followed that, and the 3 years of therapy that his own attorney had made him attend as a condition of the settlement. He was fine. He told himself this daily. He had learned to perform warmth so convincingly that even his assistant, sharp, perceptive Diane, 20 years his senior, sometimes forgot that she had never once heard him laugh. Then, on a Tuesday in late March, Ethan Rowe received a charity gala invitation from a woman named Susan Park, who ran a nonprofit arts education program for underprivileged schools. He normally ignored these. He had a formula. Donate a check large enough to get his name on the donor wall, never attend in person. But Diane had already RSVP'd on his behalf. And Diane was never wrong. The gala was held in a converted train station downtown, arch ceilings, warm Edison lights, the kind of place that made you feel like you were living inside a memory. Ethan arrived 14 minutes late, shook 4 hands, and found a corner near the bar where he could watch the room without being watched back. That was when he saw her. She was standing alone near a display of children's paintings, small, vivid things in crayon and tempera paint. She was wearing a deep blue dress that was slightly too big at the shoulders, and she had her hair pinned up in a way that had begun to come undone on one side. She didn't seem to notice. She was too busy looking at a painting of a lopsided elephant holding a red umbrella. And she was smiling. Not the practiced, social smiles that moved around the room like currency. A real one. The kind people have when they forget anyone can see them. Ethan was across the room before he made the decision to move. "One of your students?" he asked. She turned, startled. "How did you know I was a teacher?" "You're looking at a painting of an elephant like it's a Rembrandt," he said. "Only teachers look at children's art that way." She laughed. Just once, surprised. "That's either very perceptive or very creepy." "Both, probably," he admitted. Her name was Maya. He didn't give his. She didn't ask. For 22 minutes they talked about children's art, and the philosophy of why 7-year-olds always draw sons with faces, and whether or not emotional intelligence could be taught. And then she excused herself. She had early rounds the next morning, she said, in a way that made it sound casual, and she was gone. Ethan stood in the spot where she'd been standing for a long time after. Before I go any further, if stories like this are exactly what your heart needed today, hit subscribe right now. I drop new emotional stories every week, and this one? It only gets more devastating from here. Now, back to Maya. By April, Maya had stopped being able to hide it. She began wearing concealer under her eyes that had never been there before. She started taking the elevator instead of the stairs. She kept a small pill organizer, pink, covered in daisies, a gift from her students, tucked in the front pocket of her bag like a secret. The treatment Dr. Lim had recommended was a bone marrow transplant. But finding a compatible donor was proving impossible. The international registry had returned nothing. Her brother in Phoenix was tested. Not a match. Her mother in Sacramento. Not a match. The clinical trial she had enrolled in was producing results too slowly. She needed something radical. Something experimental. Something that hadn't yet been approved. Something that cost more money than she would see in 3 lifetimes. On the last day before spring break, she sat on the edge of her desk and told her class she would be away for a while, that her helper, Ms. Davies, would take care of them, that she expected full reports on the butterflies when she got back. A girl named Sophia, front row, gap-toothed, wore her hair in 2 uneven buns, raised her hand. "Are you sick, Miss Maya?" Maya smiled. "I'm working on getting better, sweetheart. My grandma said that right before she went to heaven," Sophia said, matter-of-factly. The room was very quiet. "Well," said Maya, carefully, "I plan to be very stubborn about it." Ethan Rowe had not forgotten the woman in the blue dress. He had his assistant compile a basic search after the gala, not invasive, just public records. Name from the guest list, cross-referenced with the nonprofit's donor database. Maya Chun. 2nd grade teacher. Lincoln Elementary. He did not know why he'd done it. He told himself it was idle curiosity. He told himself a lot of things. Then, in mid-April, one of his board members, a man who sat on 3 hospital foundations, mentioned something over dinner. There was a teacher at St. Mercy Hospital, he said, with a severe blood disorder. The experimental treatment she needed wasn't covered by insurance. Her GoFundMe had raised $11,000 in 3 weeks. She needed $4 million minimum just to begin. Ethan set down his fork. "What's her name?" His board member looked puzzled. "Chun. Maya Chun, I think. Do you know her?" "No," Ethan said, and reached for his wine. He left dinner early for the first time in his professional life. By midnight, he had wired the first $30 million to St. Mercy's Research Foundation anonymously, through a shell vehicle that his CFO had never been told the purpose of, with a single directive. Spare no cost for patient 412. His CFO found out the next morning and called his cell, alarmed. "Ethan, there's a transfer that." "It's authorized," Ethan said. "Don't log it under philanthropy. Log it under R&D. "That's not strictly. Log it under R&D, Marcus." There was a long pause. "Yes, sir." You won't believe what he did next or why. When Maya finally began to recover, the one question she kept asking was one that no one at that hospital was allowed to answer. 3 weeks after Ethan's wire transfer, Maya Chun was moved to a private suite on the 4th floor of St. Mercy Hospital that had not existed the week before. The room was quiet. The window looked out over a park. Someone had placed a fresh orchid on the sill. She assumed it was from the nursing staff. A team of specialists arrived the following Monday, 3 of the top hematologists in the world, 2 of them flown in from Zurich, 1 from Seoul. They spoke to Dr. Lim in clinical terms that Maya strained to understand. She caught fragments. Phase 3 cell regeneration protocol. Personalized antigen mapping. The foundation has approved full funding. She pulled Dr. Lim aside afterward. What foundation? She asked. Dr. Lim's expression was careful and practiced. There's a grant, he said, for experimental cases that show exceptional. Dr. Lim, I was a journalism major before I became a teacher. I can tell when someone is reading from a script. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, You're getting the best care in the world, Maya. I promise you that's real. Focus on that. She wanted to push. But her body was tired, and the sunlight through the window was warm, and the orchid was still blooming. She let it go. For now, Ethan received updates through a single point of contact, a St. Mercy administrator named Dr. Patricia Wells, who had agreed to provide anonymized progress reports in exchange for a substantial endowment to the hospital's pediatric wing. The updates were clinical. Numbers, counts, percentages, the kind of language Ethan usually found comforting. Now they felt unbearably thin. He found himself reading them 3 times each, parsing phrases like responding well and showing improvement, the way he used to parse contract language, hunting for the thing underneath the thing. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling window at 2 in the morning, looking out over the city, and said out loud to no one, "What are you doing?" The city didn't answer. It never did. His therapist, whom he still saw monthly, more out of habit than need, or so he told himself, had once said that Ethan spent his entire professional life solving problems for himself. That the day he spent real resources solving a problem for someone else, for no return, with no strategic benefit, would be a significant day. He had dismissed that at the time. He thought about it now, at 2 a.m., looking at a city that glittered like it was trying to tell him something. The next update came at 6:47 a.m. Her white blood cell counts had tripled overnight. Ethan Rowe put down his coffee and pressed both palms flat on his desk and breathed. By the time Maya could sit up and hold a laptop, she had already started a list. It was a teacher thing. She made lists for everything: grocery lists, classroom supply lists, lists of books she intended to read, lists of places she planned to travel once she had money, which she never quite did. But this list was different. This list had one category: who had paid for the Zurich specialists, who had authorized the personalized genetic mapping that her oncologist referred to, in a private moment, as something we've never done at this hospital before, who had made a private suite appear on a floor that didn't have one, who had sent the orchid. The GoFundMe had $11,000. The treatment had cost. She found this through careful Googling and a favor from a former college friend who worked in hospital billing somewhere north of $40 million. $40 million. For a second-grade teacher. Who in the world? She thought back to anyone who might know her. Her family was middle class and stretched thin. Her friends loved her fiercely but were all of similar means: teachers, social workers, a graphic designer, a nurse. No billionaires in her contacts list. She thought about the gala. The man at the gala. She couldn't explain why he came to mind. She had never gotten his name. He had been well-dressed, yes. Quiet in a way that suggested control rather than shyness. He had known things about art, about human psychology, in that particular way of people who have read widely and deeply. And he had looked at her, for just a moment near the end of their conversation, with an expression she hadn't been able to name at the time. She could name it now. Grief. The slip that breaks everything open. Kevin, the intern, accidentally reveals Rose Systems on a document. The break came from a 23-year-old hospital intern named Kevin, who was terrified of Maya and her clipboard and her journalist's eyes. He'd left a routing document on her tray table, by mistake paperwork he was collecting from the floor. She'd glanced at it before he could retrieve it. One line in the header of a transfer authorization caught her eye like a hook. Rose Systems Holdings LLC. Kevin turned the color of a stop sign and snatched the paper away. "That's confidential. I'm so sorry." Rose Systems, she said quietly. As in Ethan Rowe. Kevin essentially evaporated from the room. Maya opened her laptop. Ethan Rowe, 37, founder and CEO, Rose Systems. Net worth estimated at $4.2 billion. Former prodigy from Dayton, Ohio, scholarship to MIT. Built his first algorithm at 19. Known for ruthless efficiency and almost pathological privacy. A recluse by tech billionaire standards. No social media presence. No public relationships. One significant controversy, a sealed lawsuit 5 years prior. Details unknown. There was one photo. It was from a charity gala 2 years earlier. Maya Chin stared at the photo for a very long time. She recognized the eyes. The way the man was standing slightly apart from the others, watching the room. It was him. It had always been him. And so, Maya had her answer. She knew who he was. She knew what he had done. She could close the chapter, write a thank you letter, and go back to her classroom and her 22 children and her foxes on socks and the life she almost lost. She could do that. She almost did. But then the journalist in her, the one she'd buried under lesson plans and pipe cleaner flowers, asked a question she couldn't unask. Not who, but why. And that changed everything. She waited until she was strong enough to climb stairs. Then she went to his building. The lobby of Rose Systems was polished concrete and silence, and a receptionist who had clearly been trained to deflect everyone with a serene, implacable smile. Maya had dealt with 7-year-olds with behavioral plans. She was not deflectable. "I'd like to see Mr. Rowe," she said. "Mr. Rowe doesn't take. Tell him my name is Maya Chun. Tell him I was in room 412. And tell him I have very good manners, and will wait here until July if necessary." There was a pause. The receptionist made a call. A longer pause than expected. Then, "He'll see you in 10 minutes. She rode the elevator to the 47th floor, and her heart did something it hadn't done in years, something that had nothing to do with her blood counts. The elevator doors opened. He was already standing there. He looked different in daylight. Taller, somehow. The suit was charcoal gray. His hands were in his pockets, and his face was doing the thing she'd noticed at the gala, that careful, controlled stillness. But his eyes were doing something else entirely. "You found me," he said. "You didn't make it very hard," she replied. A pause. "Kevin," he said, more to himself than her. "I have to fire Kevin." Despite everything, she almost smiled. They sat in his office, on opposite sides of a table that had never been used for anything personal in its life. Maya folded her hands in her lap. "I want to understand. I made a financial allocation," Ethan said carefully, "to a medical facility for experimental research. To save my life. To advance a specific clinical protocol." She looked at him. "Mr. Rowe, I was a journalism major. I can tell when someone is reading from a script." Something moved across his face. Something that looked, briefly, like being seen. "We met for 22 minutes, she said. "We talked about children's art. You didn't even tell me your name." "No. So why?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've spent 11 years building things that return exactly what they're supposed to return. Revenue models, acquisition strategies, quarterly targets." He paused. "You were the first thing I wanted to invest in that I didn't expect anything back from." She absorbed this. "That's the loneliest thing I've ever heard," she said softly. He didn't disagree. "I want to pay you back," she said then. He blinked. It was the first genuinely surprised expression she'd seen on him. "On a teacher's salary? I'll take about 400 years. But I'm stubborn. My students will tell you." And Ethan Rowe, who had not laughed in front of another human being in 11 years, laughed. She didn't stay that first day. She left after an hour, and he walked her to the elevator. And when the doors closed, he stood there looking at them for a very long time. She called him 3 days later. Not to thank him. She'd already done that, she said. She called because she had a question about the board members of his foundation, which she was planning to write an investigative piece about. Not about him, she clarified, but about the systemic gaps in critical illness funding that meant people who didn't have an Ethan Rowe in their orbit were dying of the same disease she'd had. He answered every question. Then he said, "I'd like to fund the piece. Properly. Through a press foundation." "I'm not on the payroll," she said immediately. "I know. I meant the research costs. Travel. Data analysis." A pause. "You're going to be very difficult to hate," she said. "You weren't going to hate me," he said. "You were going to write something that changed policy. I'm just making sure the facts are airtight." She smiled. He heard it somehow. 6 months later, Maya Chin's investigative piece ran in a national journal. It called for systematic reform of experimental treatment, funding access. It named 9 hospitals. It changed 3 policies in 2 states within the year. The piece had a single funder listed in the acknowledgments, the Rowe Foundation for Clinical Access. Nobody at the journal knew it was personal. And at a school fundraiser the following October, at Lincoln Elementary, in A. Gymnasium decorated with paper pumpkins and crayon drawings. A tall man in a slightly too formal suit stood near the refreshments table, holding a cup of juice that was meant for 7-year-olds. A girl named Sophia spotted him immediately. "Are you Miss Maya's boyfriend?" Ethan Rowe, worth $4.2 billion, turned the color of a stop sign. "We're friends," he said carefully. Sophia looked at him with the absolute authority of the very young. "My grandma says boys who spend that much time helping girls are always the boyfriend. They just don't know it yet." Across the room, Maya Chun, who had heard every word, pressed her hand to her mouth to keep in the laugh. Her eyes met Ethan's above the crowd, and something settled into place. Between them, around them, in the particular way of things that have been quietly growing for a long time in the dark and have finally reached the light. She never asked him to save her. He never told her he had. But some things don't need to be said out loud. Some things are already understood, in the place where two people who have seen each other truly seen each other go to life. If this story wrecked you in the best possible way, then you belong here. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Every week, I bring you love that costs something, pain that means something, and endings that stay with you. You're already family. Now make it official.